Well, it's great to be with you here today and see so many friends and new friends and fellow authors. And what a girl. I've looked forward to this for weeks. Sam, you've done an incredible job with this. I am a huge fan of the Newton Public Library. Not only is the building beautiful and thoughtfully designed, but this collection is simply incredible. And I like to come, especially in the summers with my daughters, and we just kind of spend the day. It's a lovely third place kind of community. And thank you to Faith and Life. Faith and Life is such a wonderful bookstore. It has been part of my family's life for a long time. And it's been a joy to get to know you and to have the books carried in Faith and Life and be here with you today. And to see so many friends. This is incredible. Well, as you heard, I went to Bethel, Go Threshers. We have 5 daughters. Our last one is now in that difficult decision making about where she's going to go to school next year. And it's between Heston and Bethel. So she could be swayed. I'll just say that and we'll grad. So just put that out there. Well, it is really heartwarming to see you today. I am genuinely humbled to stand before you. This is the culmination, or maybe the start of something that has been a lifelong dream, absolutely lifelong. There were 2 things that I loved as a child. One were horses. I was a little crazy about horses, and I still am. But the other thing was writing. It was books. And first I became a reader. And when I became a reader, it suddenly occurred to me that all of the other things I loved in life and on the farm fit in a book. And what if I could put them in a book of my own making? And that idea, that very early idea, stuck with me this whole time. I went to Reddington High School, to that school district. And I have a fellow classmate here today, so that's been really fun. But I remember standing in the library in the few days before we were released for our senior graduation. And our dear librarian, who always slipped me books over the counter, she was like, I think you need to read this. I think you need to read this. And I know I wasn't alone in that because other students experienced that as well. But she said, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And there was a group of teachers in there with me. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to sit on a rock in the middle of nowhere and write books. I'm going to write books that millions of people are going to read. And then we all laughed. I laughed because even I knew how preposterous that sounded. How to get from there to here. And I can tell you it has been a long and winding road. I like to call them side quests. And there have been lots of those. But the thing that I've learned is that if you hold on to that dream, whatever it might be, all of that eventually makes sense. And that's what it's done for me. And that's really what's brought me here before you today. And I wouldn't be here before you today if anyone had told me this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Don't do it. I probably would have done it anyway, but it would have been that much harder. So all of that support that we offer to artists and authors of any age matters. My mother is 88. She began painting in her 70s. There is never a time that you cannot begin to do what you love. So back to sitting on that rock and writing. So even I knew how preposterous that sounded because I knew it was missing a whole bunch of steps. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what they should be. An economic driver was one important step that did not exist. But what I did know is that I was going to be headed to college. I was a first-generation college student. And up until that time, my life experience really had revolved around life on the farm. So I grew up driving a tractor. I had a lot of time to think, learning for life stuff, working with animals, training horses with my dad. But what I realize now is what I took with me, because guess what farmers and ranchers are really, really good at? Problem solving. And I've spent the rest of my life solving problems to be able to live this dream. I know now that that was the lesson for me. I went on to spend the next 7 years earning a 4-year degree, or as I like to call it, the extended plan. And I worked a lot of part-time jobs all at the same time during that period. But one of those jobs that I was introduced to was working as a journalist for the local paper here in town. And I also worked at the Bethel College Collegiate. And when I was at the Newton Hanson, now these only exist in special places now, but we had a newsroom and we were all packed in the same place. It was noisy and rowdy and all of the things that I loved. And what it taught me was, one, I knew how to work and I liked to work. I have a good work ethic. And I would take any story that no one else wanted, and I would do whatever it took within reason to get that story done. So they said, well, F. Lee Bailey, if anybody remembers who that is coming to the Newton airport and just flying through. And I'm like, I'm there. And I went out and, politely accosted F. Lee Bailey and, got a story and wrote that. But it was also a time that I built this muscle of being able to write all the time, anywhere, no matter what. And what I learned there and at the other newspapers I worked at, and then I went on to work nationally and internationally. I worked at daily newspapers, at glossy magazines that were household names, and I covered high-profile stories in New York and Los Angeles. I took candidates in a small town in Kansas. I did the gamut, and I loved it all. And I fell in love with people and their stories. And that's been absolutely the honor of it. For people to tell me stories, in some cases, stories that they may not have even shared with their own families. And I took that responsibility very seriously. I was young, and there were some other things I didn't take quite as seriously, but that I always did because I knew that that is my responsibility to these people sharing their lives with me. And it felt like important work because it felt like it mattered. Now, was there a clear path to do anything to further that career? Maybe. I tried to make one. I applied to law school. I got in, didn't go, became the editor of the Hutch News instead, a business editor, which was a very, different aspect of life. I hadn't really had a lot of experience with business. But all of those things led me to somewhere else, to somewhere else, to somewhere else. And I always kept the book in mind. Yeah, I was still writing during that time. I had a lot of manuscripts that I probably still have that are 3/4 finished, half finished, good attempts. But they always got pushed to the bottom of my to-do list. So a few years ago, I entered a graduate program, mostly to make sure that I focused on this project because I didn't want life to go any faster without having given this my best try. And during that course, I wrote a lot of short stories. Most MFA programs are based on short story. And I understand why, because everything in a short story is what you have in a book. And it was great practice. But I wrote one story in particular that I knew when it was done that this character needed a bigger life. This character needed to exist outside of this story. So I deconstructed it, made it a novel length work. And that is indeed this first novel that was published. Now, I saw agents. That's kind of a long process. And it can be kind of a process with a lot of ups and downs. I thought I was an emotionally moderate person until that process. And then I realized, oh, we should have literary therapists. Because if I had written the memoir during that time, it would be called Sometimes I Cry. And I'm not really a crier. So it was just, I wanted this so badly. And I wasn't willing to give up on it. So the way I saved myself during that process was I thought, oh, right, remember, you know how to work and you can control what you work on. And so I wrote this book and sent it out. And I wrote the next book, and the next, and the next. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just keep writing books forever because I know this is what I want to do. And maybe eventually something will stick. Well, without even, I didn't realize it because I would send out these missives into the universe, right? Like, we want to publish my book. And then I would just go on about my business because I would really try not to think about it because you don't want to torture yourself that way. So for about a year and a half, Penguin Random House was reading my book and I forgot I'd even sent it. And I cried a little bit during that time. And then one day, over Easter, right before Easter weekend, I got an email from acquisitions at Penguin Random House. And they were like, well, we want to see the rest of that book. And I was like, okay, absolutely. And I went to go get the rest of the manuscript. And I think I'd had a fit and deleted the middle of it at some point. I don't know what happened. And it was Thursday. I said, well, if you don't mind, I'll send it to you on Monday. That was before I discovered what I'd done. And I will happily tell you that I wrote probably 60,000 words over that weekend. Did manage to hide all those Easter eggs and see the grandchild. And we still had a lovely time. But when you want something, you'll get it done, right? I wasn't going to give up right when that opportunity arrived. And they said yes. So I had this main character in my book, Carrie Starr, who now does have this bigger life. And what I like about her is that she is complex. She's complicated. She is not always easy to love. And I think that those also happen to be qualities of some of the most interesting people that I've interviewed over the years. But the other thing that I was really struck by in Carrie Starr's story is that by now I've had the privilege of living several decades of life. And you may know someone like this. You may have been or be someone like this, where you encounter really an unimaginable loss in your own life and then get up every day and function anyway, somehow. And that's Carrie Starr's story in this book. There's a lot of other things that go on, but that's the heart of what is happening in the life of this book. She is a former Chicago detective who is at rock bottom following her daughter's death, and she takes the job as a tribal marshal on the Oklahoma reservation where her father was raised. And she is not familiar with the culture. To her knowledge, she hadn't even visited the place. And as soon as she's arrived, she's immediately embroiled in this missing person case. This young college woman has gone missing from the reservation. And this allowed me not only to pay tribute to the people who get up every day and keep going, but also to a real life issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. There are right now more than 5,500 missing Indigenous women in the United States. It's a stunning, shocking, terrible number. Now, this is according to data kept by the FBI. There are other databases that have that number at like 271. What a shocking discrepancy. The truth is, those numbers are actually unknown. We don't really even know how many Indigenous women are missing because there's no real data that has captured that. It's actually believed to be much aware. And so in this book, Carrie Starr is simply exhausted by this injustice of her own life and her daughter's death, of this young woman that's missing. And as she comes into this place, she begins to realize really what the scope of this is. And she is angry. She is ready to do something about it. She is ready to examine, well, what is justice? What does it look like? And she's willing to ask, what if we all said no more? What if each person who was able and willing to create change did so to the best of their ability? And ultimately, I hope Mask of the Dear Woman is a call to action. For years, I've kept this quote by Viktor Frankl close to me. And Viktor once wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, I first clung to that quote when my children were little, and I needed a gap in there so I could have a minute to decide my response, because I had 5 little girls at the time. But that is a powerful quote that I have clung to really at all stages of my life. And this response for me is writing. And I'm reminded over and over again about a really wonderful thing that I discovered while writing my first book. I read it in someone else's book. And the truth is, when you're writing a book, there is never a plot problem that cannot be solved. What a relief. Right. What relief. It's like you're 60,000 words in it and you're like, oh, why don't I do? But we can solve that. And I thought, hey, get on. That's life too, right? There is never a plot problem in your life that cannot be solved. So I'm happy to share that this winding and circuitous route that it has indeed included that very vision that I shared in that high school library. I have written outdoors in many states and countries new to me in past years. And a couple of summers ago, I did indeed ride on a rock in New York City's Central Park. I think 17-year-old me would be proud, but should also say, you're not done. When I penned this novel, it became the cornerstone of this next part of my life. And I saw, for the first time, I really saw how all of these varied experiences all came together into something only I could interpret and then share with the world through these characters, through future characters, through the stories that I share, and became a life force with an engine. There's that driver that I needed at 17. So my hope is that in my books, readers will discover the intrigue of literary characters who are backed into corners, who persevere when confronted with impossible choices, and who ultimately find purpose. As a reader, characters like this, my whole life, have offered meaningful ways for me to reflect on my own actions, my own reactions, and ultimately offered new ways to move through the world with intention. And I will tell you again, it is never too late to chase your dream, whatever that might be. Jorge Luis Borges said, art is fire plus algebra. And I love it. I love it. I cling to that quote too, because it really sums up my pursuit, which is a hope with teeth. This call to follow one's passion while pursuing the skills that give it that necessary infrastructure to make it a reality. Because I can tell you that when it is time for that dream to arrive, it will most certainly be unexpected, even if you've been working toward it for many years. And the understanding then of everything that you've experienced along the way really falls into place. And then the next step is, what's your next dream? What's your next dream? And that's what I'd encourage all of you to think about as you go out these doors or through life after this wonderful thought-provoking event today. What is it that you're curious about? What compels you? Follow that, because you can build your own path. That is all for me today, but I'm just very curious to hear your questions. I'd love to have a conversation with people. So I'd like to know from our other authors about their work. I would like to know if you have questions about the writing process. I'm happy to share more information about this real life topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Anything you'd like to know? Yeah.
Are you like Stephen King? You write exactly 8 hours every day with an hour off for lunch? Are you like a disciplined daily writer like that?
Okay.
Or do you write when it flows?
That's a great question. I think that's the question, right? And that's the question I ask every other writer that I meet, because I am obsessed with writers' routines. There's a podcast out in the UK called The Writer's Routine. I had the pleasure of being on it a few months ago, and I've listened to it all these years as inspiration when I was writing this book. And the variety is astounding. There was an attorney who spends the off season in Malta, and he takes a swim in the sea before he writes. But there are all of these routines that you will learn from other people and try on for size. And I'll probably write every book differently. This one was really written in kind of fits and starts. It was in a graduate program, and I had a new grandchild, and but I had that useful skill that I knew how to write no matter what else was going on. And now that I'm writing mostly full time, I teach some creative writing courses at Friends once in a while. And I try to write every morning now. And then I try to think about it the rest of the time. Yeah. I've got a lot more yard work done that way.
I got another follow-up on that.
Yeah.
I do this. I write my best stuff by far while I'm trying to fall asleep or during it just comes in perfect. I wish I had a typewriter right there.
Yes.
Keyboard right there. Yes. Then later on, when you try to put it down, it doesn't out.
Yeah, it's like you're grabbing a horse by the tail as it runs out of the barn, right? Like there's a certain magic to it. And that happens to me. And I've started paying a lot more attention to that. And I text myself things all the time. And all the time, like write texts to and from myself, or it would be odd if my eventual house to attribute that. But I found that that's really nice. And even I've started hearing, there's another writer, I don't know who it is right now. It might be Baldacci, but who carries an index card in his pocket when he goes on walks around the neighborhood, and that he can jot stuff down like that. Because I'll find that if I set my mind on something in the story, a snag, or even in a storyline, and I go out and I do some kind of physical work, that it will often unravel itself. Yeah.
I cringed when you were talking about losing a portion of the body of your murder, which reminded me one time Phil Anderson, he told me one of his biggest sellers was typewriter billing. He mails it all over the world. Do you ever use a manual typewriter?
That's how I started. Well, it started when we had a high chair, like an old metal one, and I had a tray, and I used that as my desk. And I was rewriting Black Beauty as a child, but my mother had a ribbon typewriter that she still had that I timed on. Yeah.
He was telling me authors do that so their work cannot be stolen or whatever.
Right.
Right? It's just
Yes.
to be the some use a typewriter.
That is really interesting.
Right.
So like it's a great print forever.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Well, the other good thing about being a journalist and just being on deadline all the time was that I never got too precious about anything. I never feel like I need to save something back for a future work. And that is some advice I would give. I would say, put it all in right now, because really what you're creating in this work of art is the time capsule of your interests and your passion, and I think the lens through which you're seeing the world and synthesizing meaning out of things. And then this meaning you create, this miracle happens where it goes out into the world and other people read it and then lay their meaning atop it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful endeavor. Yeah.
Is there a timetable for the second book?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking. So it is now a series. And the second book in the series is Cry the Rain Crowd. It comes out next year, the late summer, I believe. And I'm working on a third book, which is a standalone, and then a fourth book, which will be the third in the series. So we'll just have to see what Starr is up to next time. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I do nonfiction.
Yeah.
Like history. Right now, I think I'm history first to working on a cookbook, stuff like that. My curiosity is this. When I do nonfiction, I got searching. I like to research these, look at that shit about writing, only writing, kinship, what you do to have. How much do you rely on Uber as opposed to other sources? Like your groups.
Right. Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, I think my answer might be different than fiction writers who weren't journalists first, because
I was a journalist.
yes, I think we just naturally tend to blend that. Of course, you are with your nonfiction, but even with fiction, I start writing a story. And I have lots of other books that I've written, and I just think, oh, where's the purpose in this, right? And that's not to say that fun stories aren't wonderful and don't have meaning, right? That's a wonderful distraction. But I've decided that at this point in my life, I want these stories that I'm putting out in the world to hopefully become a call to action in some way. And it's about some issue that maybe I've discovered as I'm writing the book. And that's how I like to do my journalism, is not set out with this preconceived notion of what this story is going to be, but follow things where they lead. And I always find along the way that when I discover it, just as the reader is discovering it, we have a much better time together. I think it's more compelling that way. And so I did do a lot of research, but I used the same process as when I was a journalist. I interview people, I look at data, I sometimes look at other news stories, but it's really a springboard then for what this story turned into. And it's also a springboard for what I specifically researched. That it's like the difference between a preliminary research and a very targeted research. It saves me a ton of time. Yeah. You got a question?
Yep. What led you to write about indigenous women? And then also, what was my other question? My greatest.
You'll think of it.
I'll think of
Okay, we'll come back to that because I want to know. So I was adopted as an infant, and my birth family is indigenous. And I was raised by Mennonite farmers here close to Newton, relatively. And it was really a wonderful way to grow up because they really celebrated my heritage. I always knew I was adopted. And it was just really a lovely way to grow up. And I read this book probably around 2017, 18, called There There by Tommy Orange. And it had these stories of these 12 characters across the indigenous diaspora who were on their own journeys of reconnection. And the characters were all very different from each other. And they were quite disconnected in some ways. And there were these boys living in Oakland, California, these teenage boys. And I related to them so incredibly closely that I'll never get over it. I'm like, that's the power of literature, right? Because here I am, 50-year-old woman in Kansas that I'm like, oh, I understand you, and it's humanity at its greatest level when we can have some conversation like that. But it propelled me to think, well, what would a reconnection look like for me? And in some ways, I had done some of that. I'd met my birth family and learned our family stories and those sorts of things. But in a more global sense, in a more community sense, what would that look like? And that's what I explored in part through this fund.
Well, I think that leave it there.
Any other
Do you
questions?
have a question? Well, and we'll, of course, there are books for sale. We can chat some more, but let's give Laurie a round of applause.
No, because I'm telling you to, I'll take time out of your day. I genuinely said thank you. I know y'all have lots to do, and I appreciate it all.
And we'd love to have you back. When your next book comes out.
I would love to. Yes, a year ago, or maybe longer, I have a picture in the shelves there pointing to where my book would be someday. And so this library in particular has been a big source of inspiration. So I appreciate you and everything that you've done.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, meeting adjourned, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.